Hello, Friloquy here. Friloquy. That works. Today I'll be taking a look back at Kingdom of Amalur Reckoning. The game was released quite some time ago, I think 2012 to be exact, and it had two noteworthy follow-up expansions after its initial release. Teeth of Naros and Jaws of... No, wait, I mean Legend of Dead Kale. Kale. The game can be found on Steam floating around for I think about $5. I think I just saw it. It was 75% off. So as of this recording, it's pretty cheap to get the base game and the two worthwhile expansions. And while I did manage to play the game shortly after it was released, there was something back then that kept me playing the game for a prolonged period of time that I felt held the game back and is the central focus of this video. I find the game to be interesting because I consider it a good, even great action RPG at points, but I never really felt invested or engaged enough to consider it one of my personal favorites. I'm going to talk about what I think worked, but ultimately what held this game back. Now, I know I'm not so much interested in the murky financial situation with Kurt Schilling and the whole game development process and just its troubled release. I just chalk that up to expecting too much from a new IP alongside of some questionable business decisions. But anyways, that's a whole different story for another time. So one of the high points of the games were its visuals. Maybe I'm just a sucker for this kind of art direction, but everything just worked and blended well together. From the models, the environments and buildings, it all just worked exceptionally well for the general, high fantasy direction that they were going for. Aesthetically, it's reminiscent of World of Warcraft, simply being being an earlier game that comes to mind. But it does have its own unique enough flair that makes it distinct from any other game around that period. The armors and weapons are vivid, they're colorful, and they are unique. I believe this is the first time that I got to play with chakrams in a game, and I wish that they would have other games would have gone with chakras and just kept going with them. But I haven't found or I haven't played a game since then using chakrams the way they're used them here. And if anyone knows of a game that uses the chakrams, go ahead and comment. That'd be great. Um, but in any case, it's safe to say, well, the visual effects are they're just superb. From casting any magical spell to your weapons and armors glowing a particular color, I often find myself just using different weapons and spells to see how they look. The natural environments are immersive and grand and varied enough to keep exploration of the map exciting, and the monsters are all interestingly designed and at times intimidating, oftentimes kind of comical, but they're nevertheless it's always fun to see what the next big monster it's going to be and how you're going to take it down. Um, the various races, well, the four races plus the Fae are distinct enough that there is variety in presentation. Um, but at times I did feel that the game basically just broke down to two races, humans and elves, with the dwarves or gnomes or whatever they were just basically coming off as short people. When it comes to the audio, it basically breaks down to the sounds in the game being superb. The ambient music is well suited for the environments. The dialogue is, well, it's up and down. The accents used can be enduring, but oftentimes they come off bland, borderline irritating, and oftentimes just forgettable. I mean, the same can be said about the NPCs in the game overall. Some are great, some not so much, and some you can't even remember right after you get your reward for completing whatever crest they happen to give you. Of course, the player himself is a silent protagonist. I say, of course, because you know, fully voiced protagonists are and were in season at that point, or still not so much, except for the correction. He does grunt, so every now and then you can hear him go, when he runs or something like that. So I guess he's the grunting silent protagonist. But in any case, basic stuff like the sounds that your weapons make, the sounds that spells make, and just kind of walking around, hearing your footsteps, it all works well. It blends well. Charging up your electrical spells, using your ice spells, they sound just like you would expect that kind of spell to sound if you were living in a magical world where you could cast those kind of spells. Um, but otherwise, nothing really bad to say about the sounds. Overall, they work well with the game's direction in creating art direction and creating this hauntingly fantastical, whimsical world. When it comes to the gameplay, and here I'm talking about just the systems and general mechanics that are used, the mechanics that are used in a game. In this case, I love the combat, so that's the first thing. Being able to seamlessly transition between the different combat styles was fun, and somewhat exhilarating because you can one moment be blasting an opponent with the lightning strike, then switching to your great sword or whatever it happens to be you're using. Admittedly, as you progress, the option to focus on one particular combat style becomes more tantalizing. At least I felt it was. But there is also the option to maintain that combat flexibility by going down the universalist route or one of the different combination routes. It's not one of those situations where one route is clearly better than the other. Although I never really enjoyed the rogue stealth route, but that's just a personal preference. Um, it in regards to being better, the routes being better than the other, the weapons and combat styles of every path are. I know I just found them. They're all enjoyable. If you want to play the rogue, it's enjoyable, and you can do it. Even for someone like me who doesn't really like rogue style stealth play, I still found it worth trying. Although I did feel that the weapons on the magic side were not very effective, but I suppose that's because you have magic spells to if you're going down the magic route. So it just kind of makes sense that the weapons wouldn't be as, effective on that side. But while the combat presents this amazing, fun, action-oriented, enjoyable experience, most of the other systems of the game are kind of lackluster. The alchemy system is okay. I mean, I would just pick up a few herbs here and there if they were on my way, and when I had the chance, craft a few potions. But I never really wanted to or felt that I had to go out of my way to make better, more potent potions because it just didn't really feel necessary. And this was playing on the hardest difficulty they had, which was hard. The difficulty itself was called hard, which is the hardest difficulty. Okay, so I suppose if I might have had a few more potions, I would have not have died whenever I didn't have reckoning mode ready to activate, but I still didn't think it was worth it. The same can be said about the crafting system. While I did use gems to increase the stats of some of my armor, I never really used sagecraft or blacksmithing, the two skills that I just generally assigned to the crafting system, even though I did invest points in them. I actually found myself just visiting the Fate Weaver to reassign those points whenever I wanted to switch up the path I was following. Like noted, I've never really been a big fan of stealth, especially in a game like this. But it is there, and it can be enjoyed with some effort and investment. But for me, it was just kind of this throwaway mechanic that they had in there. Uh, Boss fights are entertaining. Well, most of them. But I found myself using the Reckoning mode to quickly cut through nearly every boss, which was great for progression, but made boss battles rather quick. So that's my hang up on the Reckoning mode. I feel that it was just too strong. If you just save up that Reckoning mode to get to a boss, it really just becomes a matter of when or how you're gonna kill him as opposed to if you're gonna get through him without dying multiple times. It just felt like kind of a straight forward matter of activate reckoning mode, kill the boss, done. Um, so when it comes to the other enemies, they are varied, but most of them don't really call for a change in tactics or approach. Now, there are weaknesses within certain enemies that can be exploited, and if you want to quick kill, exploiting those weaknesses is key, but otherwise, just hitting them with your choice of combat moves usually works. For example, even when you're low level dealing with the bug arts, hitting them with fire tends to do, they're vulnerable to fire, so it tends to do more damage. But hitting them with the big baseball bat probably just has the same effect, and you'll be able to kill them just as easily, even at when you're at when you're at a comparable level. Um, but there's no baseball bat in this game, although it would have been interesting if they did have some sort of baseball bat. So, what about the dialogue and persuasion options, otherwise just known as the diplomatic route? Well, at least to me. Unfortunately, it's a matter of paper thin presentation. It's almost as if each character was designed to fill a certain purpose, and that's exactly what they appear to do, and nothing else. But maybe that's exactly what they were going for in a game about destiny and fate and actors in the grand scheme. But nevertheless, this can be this the whole paper thin thing can be said about NPCs in any games. But in this game, they just felt as if they were actors and not people in their own world. Now, this would be okay with the Fae, as they're technically acting when encountered at certain points, but the whole world at times just seems almost rigid, as if these people were there to play this role as soon as you encounter them, and that's it. They're not living in a world, they are presenting this world to the player, which just came off kind of weird to me. I'm not sure if anybody else that played this game felt that way, but that's how it came off to me. Now, this leads me to the overall issue I have with immersion in the game. So, the first time I heard the story, I thought it was unique and inspired. Immortal beings, resurrection, and a war between immortals and mortals. I liked the whole setup. As I played through the game, I also enjoyed a number of the minor stories that are handed down by the Fae and some of the other factions like the Warsworn, who, as their name might suggest, are sworn to war. My greatest issue is simply how my character was integrated in the story. Similar to other games where you're allowed to do a number of different quests that grant different titles and honors, my issue here is again an issue that I have with most RPGs. When you can be anything and everyone, you kind of break character rather quickly. While the side quests and faction quests are worth trying, the faction quests are. The side quests are a lot of checking up on this and then getting ambushed. They kind of become the same after a while, and it's what bugged me was when I became so. For example, when I became king of the House of Ballads, I still had to start from square one with the Warsworn. Now, as entertaining as that first mission with the Warsworn is, and as unexpected, I actually like that mission. I still think it wreaks havoc with immersion when you're simultaneously the top of one faction and no one in another, or people outside of that faction don't really recognize you. And I guess that would make sense if you're not in the faction, but some sort of recognition for a prominent position and adjustment would make a little more sense. And anyways, another thing that bugged me was how static everything seemed. Now, I touched on this with the NPCs, and this might just be my perception, but as I played through the game, there was no illusion of evolution or dynamic progression. Everything seemed to be stuck in place until I set things in motion to change something. And then once it was changed, it went back to being this rigid component of the game. Admittedly, this can be said about most any RPG, but there was something about this game that made the world seem overly staged to the detriment of the game. Maybe I just noticed it more because the game's narrative focuses on fate and how some of the Fae are destined to play their roles and their destinies forever. Like, well, I mean, the House of Ballad, maybe just because I was focusing on the House of Ballad quest here, but it just left this impression of a rigidly staged world that might have been the point, but it certainly didn't do anything to make me feel like I was part of it, even as if I was supposed to be one of the breaker of chains. Um, Ultimately, I felt this role as a breaker of Destiny's chains was also little more than a stage role that did nothing to make me feel the world was more dynamic. In the end, I found it to be similar to looking at a beautiful picture and not actually engaging with that picture or being able to move things around in that picture. like you should be able to do in a dynamic world. In terms of longevity, the game can be played multiple times if someone really enjoys the combat and wants to try a pure build of one path over the other and see how it would do in like the early stages. But then again, you can just reassign your stats at any point throughout a single playthrough. So I don't really think that would be necessary, but people like to play games in different ways and go for it if that's what you want to do. Anyway, going through the game, I didn't feel that I would want to come back and try a different option for any given quest or storyline branch. They all sort of felt equally acceptable regardless of how I was playing. Nevertheless, the game does have its charm, and I have found myself coming back to it on occasion to play it for a moment, but not for very long. Ultimately, that's what holds this game back. I think it has one good playthrough in it and not much else beyond that. While it's a great RPG and I love the game for what it is a single playthrough that once you're done, you're out and moving on to the next game, potentially forgetting about this one. And ultimately, I think that was the detriment. That was to the detriment of this game. It really didn't have the gravitas to pull off a single game experience, even though that single game experience was excellent. It it needed some other kind of um, I would say something that would keep the players coming back and keep generating word of mouth to make more players to get more players coming into it. So that wraps it all up. Till next time, and thanks for listening.